And welcome to all of you who are joining us today at Still and Moving Center for Gems from the Wisdom Traditions. Today we have the opportunity to take up the topic of tuning into a higher vibration. And so it seems very fitting that I should turn to a longtime friend of mine, Jaffe. He is someone who has given numerous workshops and performances at Still and Moving Center over the years. And he is also someone who has trained deeply in the classical Indian music tradition. In fact, if I am correct, he studied Sarod with Ali Akbar Khan. Is that correct, Jas? Yes. And so as we head into this topic of tuning into a higher vibration, Jas, I wanted to ask you whether you wanted to start with a musical interlude before I ask you a question.
Being the chronic rule breaker that I am, I'd love to start with something special. Since we have kind of an intimate group, could we maybe all go around, and of course if you don't want to share, that's fine, but go around and say your name and like one sentence of what this means to you, tuning into a higher vibration, because it's kind of a topic that can be looked at in any number of ways. Is that okay that I start this way, Renee?
I think that's beautiful.
Okay, so who would like to go first?
Well, I would say tuning into a higher vibration to me is about being attuned to energy and rhythm.
My feeling with tuning into a higher vibration is it makes me calm. So I'm looking for peace and calmness.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking it's coming to a quiet, feeling the silence first, and that's calming. And then I would say it's kind of feeling a heart energy first.
Thank you. Maurice, while we're on your screen, do you want to weigh in here?
Well, sometimes I think it's just a kind of tuning into the light, that there's just some kind of a greater light quality and lightening up kind of thing, and not being, with it. And other times when I've listened to Indian music, sometimes it can elicit a little bit of a trance state.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Cliff, do you have a thought there?
Well, I agree with both Maurice and Jenny. To me, tuning into a higher vibration has a lot to do with kind of stilling the mind and the emotions and getting to a place, a centered place where one is really calm, as Jenny was saying, and very, very receptive to those kind of vibrations that are hard to detect most of the time. But if we can get ourselves in the right state of heart and mind, we can pick them up.
Mm-hmm. Would anyone like to speak rather? Whether or not you have your screen on is fine.
For me, it's following my intuition, following my whatever higher self or the thing inside that puts things together that I don't usually follow.
Carol.
For me, I think it's about kind of eliciting that personal curiosity and really that self-inquiry that we kind of go through as we process life and learn about ourselves. There's a lot that I think people don't know about their own person. And for me, that's what's important.
I think for myself, Sharon, that it's like reaching beyond myself or my bubble or the bounds that are around me and being able to reach others.
For me, hi, it's Alice. For me, it's about tuning into those aspects of life that I just let go in my day-to-day life. You know, it's that part that is sort of, you know, the spiritual aspect, the part that sort of sometimes gets pushed aside while we're doing work or whatever, and it's just tuning into that aspect and feeling that connection with the other realms of our existence, so to speak.
Yeah, Mari?
For me, tuning into a higher vibration is a way of deep listening with my heart. And then it ends up feeling like my own thoughts and insecurities, and end up feeling it's almost like being in an airplane and watching them get smaller, smaller, smaller as you go up. If it's with music and movement, it ends up feeling almost like it's just a conversation, or almost even being possessed by, in some ways, by just it. I don't know how to explain it, but just being.
Now we can hand it over to you, Joss. I feel a little more tuned in already. With this theme for the year of self-crafting, Joss, I feel as if in some ways we can take this presentation very personally. Like, what can we do to raise our own personal vibration? And not for ourselves, but for the sake of the whole, for raising the vibration of the world, of everyone who is around us, which I think you take on very seriously as the musician that you are. And with that idea of perhaps in a way purifying our own emanations so that we can be more pure receivers of vibration and attune ourselves, therefore, more subtly to, like, let's say everything is on a graded scale of light and darkness. And so to attune ourselves to be in greater resonance with the light allows us to be maybe more radiant sharers of life with the rest of the world. So, with all these things that we've had to share with you verbally, what could you let us know that you have learned through training in classical Indian music and your subsequent work with music in your life since then?
Wow, what an amazing question. And thank you all so much for sharing your beautiful sentiments. I'm so glad that actually we did that. But now I'm honestly a little bit nervous because I thought I was giving a lecture on music and a presentation on music, and now I feel like it's like a spiritual Dharma talk. But actually, I say that in all sincerity because I'm really touched actually by all the responses, and it's one of these questions. It's almost like a koan, you know, the Eastern philosophical poem, like a koan, where the words can sort of be interpreted in many different ways, and someone could interpret this question or this theme in so many different ways. So let's think about it. Tuning into a higher vibration, right? Each one of those words have a whole sort of mystical repertoire around them. And it makes me think about the language of ancient India, which is Sanskrit. And Sanskrit is a very unique language in that each word has many different potential meanings, like the spokes of a wheel. So the word is in the center, and then there's many different potential meanings of that word. And all languages are a little bit like this, but Sanskrit is particularly known for that. So for instance, tuning, you know, what is tuning? So from a musical standpoint, tuning is zeroing into that note, right? And there's a gradient of that. My teacher, Ali Akbar Khan, had a great analogy. He described it like driving a car, right? And some people think that the note is always constant, but if you think about driving, right, you're always kind of turning the wheel like a little bit and then a little bit, you know, you're always sort of correcting. And that's the way tuning is. So for instance, if I'm playing this note, depending on how I blow the note, it'll kind of go up or kind of go down, almost like a wave. And so many of the people here are in Hawaii. You're probably very familiar with waves. And sometimes you go out to the beach and the waves are very calm, right? Very placid. And sometimes they're like, whoa, you know, don't go swimming today unless you're like Kelly Slater or something. But so this is the concept of tuning. And a lot of you talked about tuning in terms of like a experiential tuning. You're tuning into something inside, or tuning into sort of an experience of awareness, right? Consciousness. So tuning is a really deep concept. And in India, it's almost like people approach tuning the way an Olympic athlete would approach their sport, right? I mean, they'll practice 8 or 12 or more hours a day. And there was a time in my life when I actually did this. And you sing a note, one note for maybe an hour or more. And you really try and go super deep into this concept of tuning. You know, from that perspective, it is almost like a spiritual practice, like meditation. You know, what are we doing when we're meditating? Well, to bring it back to waves, Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, it says, Vrita Chitta Nirodha. Yoga Vrita Chitta Nirodha. Yoga is the cessation of the waves of the mind. So the concept of yoga and the concept of meditation is actually trying to make those waves become still. And in a way that's very similar to music. We're trying to create a very, especially in Indian music, we're trying to create a very specific sound, right? So that's tuning. And then we say into, so we're already kind of coming in. And a lot of you had wonderful analogies of this sort of internal landscape. You know, I can tell I'm with some very experienced yogis here today, some very experienced meditators and people. And then a higher, right? So then there's that element of higher versus lower. So that brings in a whole host of kind of associations, you know, especially in spirituality, the sort of higher level of our awareness and you know, loving kindness towards other people, you know, basically being a better person, being a more aware and loving person. You know, but also from a musical standpoint, the notes actually get higher, right? So, and so it's actually interesting, a high note actually takes more energy to create, right? If I'm going to sing a low note, oh, like Johnny Cash or something, I can do it in a very relaxed way, right? But if I want to sing a really high note and have it sound beautiful, I have to sing in, I have to have a more energetic approach. Right? So you actually need more breath, you need more prana, and you need to be a little bit more aware, because those higher notes, vibrationally speaking, that's our last word, vibration, they're closer together. The waves are faster and closer, and we can actually hear them better. So it's harder to sing in tune there because it's easier to go out of tune, right? So there's all these elements of higher where there's more pressure involved to have that higher vibration. It might not be relaxing to be at a higher vibration. So we have a lot of positive associations with what is higher, but it actually takes a lot more energy to be higher, right? So, and this is true, you know, in a lot of contexts. And so the last thing I'll say is about vibration. And vibration is the element of movement, right? So the classic example of that is a pond, and you throw a rock into a pond, and these ripples vibrate out from the rock in the pond. And there's so many analogies about this in spirituality, in stories. Musically speaking, what it means is that you strike a note. I'm going to bring up my guitar here now. You strike a note, that's a low note, and it creates all these other notes. So from a musical standpoint, it's called what's called a generating tone, the generation tone. So the first tone is this, but then from that tone, you get higher tones, right? So these are what's called harmonics. And I'm not actually playing the string, I'm just fretting it gently to create another note out of that note, right? So these are all different notes, and they get higher and higher and higher. So if you've ever heard like Tuvan throat singing or any of these types of singings, the overtonal singing, every note has actually, honestly, uncounted other notes. They become so hard to hear that the human ear can't hear them. But the idea is that you just do one sound, and there's all these other sounds that you're creating, all these other vibrations. So to bring it back to what Renee's saying about living in the world, we're always doing this. We're always having an effect. We're exerting an effect on the world, a vibrational effect on the world. So that can take on so many different forms. But by doing these practices that she's talking about, we do have that emanating effect on the world. This is why you become more relaxed when you hang out with like a meditation master or someone who does this all the time. So that's my description of the whole thing. And I'm going to give it back to Renee. Does that help to answer your question in my own unique way?
Absolutely. Yes, that's a big help. Let's call on Maurice or Jenny, whoever had their hand up.
Now, based on what you just said, could you say something about a keynote? Because
keynote.
A keynote. Because
just define the term for me, keynote.
Well, a keynote is something which defines the tone or tonality.
Oh, I see. You mean in music?
Throughout the whole
episode
throughout the whole episode, whatever you want to call it. I mean, I'm used to like, what's the keynote theme for the year, or what's the keynote for the cycle? but I think it comes from music. So I wanted to learn a little bit more about, well, what is a keynote?
That's great. That's a great question. And again, it's a question that can be interpreted a little bit differently. There, like you correctly alluded to, there's a keynote speaker. So, the concept can be thought of as differently. But from a musical standpoint, key, so the musical key is a Western concept, all right? So if you've ever seen staff notation, right? And this comes from ancient European music, which is super deep. And it actually, if you go back far enough, it's actually similar to Indian music in a lot of ways. Like if you go back to like Gregorian chanting and stuff like that, these sort of generating tones, the chanting that they would do had a vibrational quality similar to the way that Indian singers also have. So a lot of world music keys into this type of music. But as European music developed, it became more and more complicated with harmony and piano and the harpsichord and all the instruments. And basically they settled on a type of a musical system that had 12 notes, okay? Other musical systems have more or less than 12 notes, but in Europe they settled on 12 notes, and they settled on its type of tuning frequency, right? So you've heard that A440, probably everyone's heard about A440. That means that the note A is literally vibrating at 440 hertz. Right? So there's a sound wave. It looks like a sine wave, similar to like a wave you'd surf in the ocean, a vibrational wave, and it's moving that fast at 440 cycles in 1 second. And because of that, we hear a certain note. And there's all kinds of wild acoustic properties that I could talk about. I love this sort of theory, this sort of theme. I love talking about esoteric neuroacoustics and whatnot. But suffice to say that A is one key, and there's also A sharp and B and C, and there's 12 of them. So that sets the tone for the piece. And there's lots of music theory that we could get into to describe that. But basically, it's sort of like a language, and it's so someone can immediately see that this in this key, it's in that key, and that is an important note in the song. To bring it back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, it's also the generating tone, okay? And that's a kind of a weird concept because in European music, the piano is all equal. It's all equal tempered. But there was a time back in the era of Bach, there was a thing called the well-tempered clavier, and they were making music where those resonances were still there. Right? The resonances that you get in India and other places. So again, we can go super deep into the theory side, but hopefully that gave you some context to your question.
Yeah. Josh, at the beginning, did you say that you studied with Ali Akbar Khan?
I did indeed. Yes, Ali Akbar Khan was a master musician from India. His brother-in-law was Ravi Shankar, who was very famous for collaborating with the Beatles during the 1960s. And so anyone who remembers when those songs came out, it was obviously before my time, but my dad had all those LPs, when Norwegian Wood came out, and so a lot of people heard the sitar for the first time. And it was this very groundbreaking experience. Of course, in the 60s, people were experimenting with lots of things and sort of opening their mind and their consciousness to different things, to different worlds, different languages, different cultures. It was a very experimental time. And one thing that happened was this great connection, between like hippies basically and the music of India. So Ravi Shankar, played at Woodstock and the Monterey Pop Festival and things like this. And so it was like a unique cultural moment when two cultures came together. And so yeah, you have your hand up there.
No, I didn't want to interrupt though.
Oh. No, I kind of went a little bit off on a tangent there, but I hope that I answered your question.
I did have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
Because I've heard that Ali Akbar Khan is considered the greatest modern tabla player. And
so he doesn't play tabla. Sarod you're thinking.
Sarod.
I think. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sarod, but yeah, with Ravi Shankar. And so who was the tabla player that played with them?
Many tabla players played with Ali Akbar Khan. With Ravi Shankar, the famous tabla player's name was Ala Raka. And he was a very cool guy named Ala Raka. And his son was named Zakir Hussein, who has since become incredibly famous around the world. I was fortunate enough to study with him as well. I got to perform with him on one occasion. And he's a true genius of music and rhythm, and really just groundbreaking. He was in a band in the 70s called Shakti with John McLaughlin. And again, you know, like I was saying, that moment in the 60s when these two cultures connected, it was sort of like the rock getting thrown in the pond, and it created these ripples that would be felt, you know, until today and well into the future. And it created all these new creations of music, you know, that happened in jazz, and it happened in orchestral music. I was just watching a movie the other day, and it was a kind of a 70s throwback movie, and in the song you hear tablas and you hear like all these kind of cool sounds. So, you know, it's become something that's part of our culture as well. And I'm going to pivot now to talking about the tablas, which I have right here. And so the tablas are the drums of North India. And they're super cool because they have sort of like a language associated with them. So for instance, the teacher can go, da, ginaka takita ginagedaka. And then you can play, da, ginaka di, ginaka dig 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 taka da, kredaka taka di, ginaka da, ginaka digi na digi ke naka digi na taka 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 digi taka 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 di da di da. Right. So the tabla is very cool, and does anyone have a question about the tablas or a comment before I go on?
I think Carol had a question right before that.
Go for it.
It wasn't really a question. It's just as you were speaking about the hippie movement, I'm actually from Carmel Valley.
Oh, sweet.
And my dad was a bouncer for Hendrix. And he played percussion, very serious. I have some Hells Angels in my family. And so I have watched this movement since a child, and have been very fortunate to be exposed to the exact culture that you're speaking of. So it's pretty magical. I live just north of Big Sur now.
Wow, that's one of my favorite parts of the world. I was just there a week ago, and I love that you tell me these stories. It's so interesting to me. My dad was also a big hippie. He had this like big afro when he was in college at UC Berkeley from 1963 to 67. And he was like literally standing in Sproul Plaza when Mario Savio jumped up on the police car and started the free speech movement. So he's told me all kinds of wild stories. So yeah, definitely as a child of hippies, I also have some fun stories to tell. And I mean, it wasn't all obviously candlelight and roses, as you mentioned, you know, with the Hells Angels and everything, but you know, it was a magical time that sort of gave birth to a lot of, you know, I think artistic and cultural awareness, you know, in our society that we're still feeling now. You know, obviously as a musician, some of the most groundbreaking music was made at that time, you know, so you can't minimize that. But yeah, so the tablas are the drums of India. And when I first heard this theme of the higher vibration as a drummer, I immediately thought of rhythm, right? So the same way we were talking how the vibration of the notes, right? So the vibration of the notes go up. For instance, if I play this note, actually let me play A, I'll play A440. So that's A. If I play an octave above that, it's the same note, but it's vibrating twice as fast, right? And we can also do that rhythmically, right? So if the tabla is going da ti da ge na ta titakita da ti da ge tu na ke na ta ti ta ke na ta titakita da ti da ge din na ge na. Twice as fast would be da ti ta ke na da titakita da ti ta ge tu na ke na ta ti ta ke na ta titakita da ti ta ge din na ge da ti ta ge na da titakita da ti ta ge din na ge da ti ta ge na da titakita da ti ta, and it sounds. Twice as fast. Okay, so, and actually, let's all do that together. So I'm going to teach you a rhythm. So in India, the names of the actual notes are called bols, B-O-L. And bol literally means word, okay? So like for instance, the first bol is dha, and it's D-H-A, it's an aspirated D, dha. So this one actually has a story to it, which is a little bit funny, and it'll help you to remember it, right? So once there was a tabla player, and he had a dog. And that dog was very naughty. He was a very naughty dog. And he was so bad that the owner said, "Doggy, naughty, nage, dina. Doggy, naughty, nage, dina." Okay, so let's all try and say that together. The naughty dog that doesn't get dinner. All right? Dage, nati, nage, dinna. Let's all say it together. Dage, nati, nage, dinna. Okay, and so the way that you do this in India with the rhythm is on the da you clap. Okay, that's the first beat. Dage, nati, and then on the fifth beat you wave. Okay, nage dinna. So it's 8 beats. Dage nati, nage dinna, and you clap on the 1 and you wave on the 5. Okay, so let's try it together really slow. Dage nati, nage dinna. Dage nati, nage dinna. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Dage nati, nage. Now twice as fast. Dage nati, nage dinna. Dage nati, nage dinna. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Dage nati, na. Twice as fast. Dage nati, nage dinna. Dage nati, nage dinna. Dage nati, nage dinna. Dage nati, nage dinna. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Dage nati, nage dinna. Dage nati, nage. Twice as fast. And dage nati, nage dinna. Dage nati, nage dinna. Dage nati, nage dinna. Dage nati, nage dinna. Right? So what we were doing there, in addition to being fun and laughing with each other and clapping our hands and telling a story about a naughty dog, is that we were going up the octaves, the rhythmic octaves of higher vibration, right? So 1 is very slow, then it's twice as fast, then it's 4 times as fast, and then it's 8 times as fast. So we're literally tuning into a higher vibration. So when Renee told me this, that was like the very literal analogy of doing this. And you know, it may sound, even though it's so literal, it may sound abstract, but when do we do this, right? For instance, there's many analogies in life, like say we're riding a bike, and then we shift up to the gear, and we shift up to the gear, and we work harder, and we go faster. So in life, we're sort of constantly raising and lowering our vibration. And in fact, we have to do this, right? We actually have to do this. I read a beautiful quote from Thich Nhat Hanh to circle back to the spiritual dimension. Let me just read it for you, because I want to get it right. So, you know, the opposite of sort of raising the vibration super, 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 super high is actually taking it down to effectively zero, right? Because what is the zero vibration? It's like rest, okay? And if we didn't sleep, if we didn't rest, actually we'd literally die. You know, scientists say that if we don't sleep, we would actually die. We need to have that circadian pattern. So this is, I think, relevant. And Thich Nhat Hanh, the beautiful Buddhist master, said, it's very important that we relearn the art of resting and relaxation. Not only does it help prevent the onset of many illnesses that develop through chronic tension and worrying, it allows us to clear our minds, focus, and find creative solutions to problems. So this is sort of the opposite of raising the vibration, but it's sort of inverted, right? We are kind of, we're kind of lowering the vibration to the point where we can just rest and be at peace. And so I'm going to give it back to Renee, because we actually had an interesting discussion about this talk, about, you know, this push and pull. She described it between ease and difficulty. You want to talk about that a little bit, Renee, about how you were telling me on the phone?
Well, actually, I was quoting one of our frequent participants at GEMS, David Sanders, who often talks about the flow state. And so within that flow state, in order for that to be perpetuated, there needs to be a certain amount of difficulty, or one will lapse into boredom. But it can't be too difficult. There needs to be a certain ease for that flow to happen. So I think that was perhaps what I was referencing.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I just had a call with a friend who was talking about this, and he was doing a workshop, and he described the flow state in that when we are stressed, we get the adrenaline response, right? When something happens to us that makes us stressed or worried, or, you know, we have to take activity to solve a serious problem, we get adrenaline in our system. And this workshop leader was saying that when you have that adrenaline, it actually locks you out of the flow state, right? To access the flow state that artists and musicians describe, you have to actually be calm. And I thought it was very interesting when we went around at the beginning. A lot of people talked about calmness, right? And finding their center. A lot of people use the word center. Here we are at the still and moving center. And very relevant, I think. So I think that's interesting, you know, to think about is sort of course, I don't think anyone really truly knows what are the preconditions of creativity. You know, you'll talk to 100 artists and probably get 100 different answers. You know, how do you get the creative impulse? You know, I'm sure we would all have a different answer to that. So I don't think you can put your finger on it exactly, but I think that these things are very interesting to think about. You know, how do you access that creative state? And for me, I do have to be in a somewhat relaxed mind. I can't be like super stressed out or anything. Although sometimes it comes after working out, you know, when I'm going on a long run or something like that, I suddenly just get an idea that just like shocks into my system. So, you know, the body could, it's not that I have to like take a nap and then I get the idea, but some artists do. You know, Kubla Khan apparently was written by an author after he woke up from a dream. And he had the whole book was in the dream, and he wrote it all down in one long sitting. So again, I don't think there's one answer to this question, but I think it's very interesting.
Does it feel to you in your personal experience with creativity that you, in addition to being relaxed, you also need to work yourself up to a certain rhythmic state? Like when I was watching you play, I didn't get the sense of you stressing out even when you went faster. Right? But when I've attended Indian concerts and I have experienced those musicians gradually working themselves up and up till they're going faster and faster, it just seems that they reach a hum.
Yeah.
And then all kinds of things can happen. I mean, it can slow down again too, but there's this vibrational state of consciousness, it seems as though they get into, and we as the audience can join into also.
Yeah, that's really well put, Renee. That's really beautiful. And there's so many ways that we could talk about that we could really have a whole workshop on just that topic. You know, for me personally, I feel like, you know, one of the killers of creativity is worry. If I'm worried, I can't create. I just can't, you know? It's like, and that's funny actually, when I have a project, a creative project, and I have a deadline or something, often what I'll do is I'll just like go watch a movie or watch 3 movies, you know? I need just like, I just completely take out the element of stress and worry, even if I'm like really coming up against a deadline. Does anyone else do this kind of procrastination, you know? So, you know, you can beat yourself up about it, but it's actually interesting. That's probably, you know, a sort of, you know, kind of response. It's probably like an intelligent response from our subconscious and our inner self that we need actually to reduce the pressure. We have to, or else we can't create, you know? And so it's actually a really interesting thing to think about is, you know, what are the contexts around the ability to create something? Because, you know, no matter what your job or your role is, you need creative energy to accomplish that goal. You know what I mean? Even the most simple tasks, like you need to actually feel that fire of creativity to feel interested enough to do it and to do a good job. You know, and of course it's obviously very true, you know, in any of the artistic fields, you know, because you're making something new. You're making something totally new. And so what Renee is talking about in Indian music, which I actually think is very important and relevant to this theme, and I'll touch on it, is that anyone who's listened to classical Indian music, it starts out very slow. And that system is called alap. So a means without, and the lap is the rhythm, right? So it starts with completely unfixed rhythm, almost like coming out of the void, right? And the sound is very slow. It was similar to the way I played on the flute at the beginning of this session. Just unfixed, untethered, slow sounds. From that alap section, a pulse comes. You begin to show that pulse, and that's called jor. And it begins pulsing almost like a breath, right? And then the tablas come in, and they mark the rhythm. That's called laya. That's the structured rhythmic component. And then it usually starts slow. And then it gets faster and faster and faster and faster and faster, and faster, and then suddenly it's like super fast, and it's like, and like Renee was describing it, everyone gets excited and jubilation, and then it concludes in a big climax. And so that's sort of the arc of Indian music, and that's the way it's almost always shown. So the music itself is kind of like raising the vibration. And you know, after you're done listening to it, you feel different. And that's true of many things. The other thing that I thought of in addition to tabla when Renee invited me to do this lecture is, has anyone taken a yoga class? I'm sure we probably all have, because we're all friends with Still and Moving Center. In my experience, I never don't feel better after taking a yoga class. Sometimes it's really, really hard to go into the yoga class. I don't want to go do the yoga, but I always feel better afterwards. So it's this sort of transmutation of the body, even if it's a very relaxing class like yin or restorative. There's something that has shifted through the act of doing it, right? And so I think that that's analogous to this musical discussion. So yeah, that was a beautiful question. We're getting just close to the end of our hour here. I'd love to open up the floor if anybody else wants to chime in. And
not being a musician myself, I've always been very attracted to the Indian aesthetic of the artwork and the artist, creativity, but also the artwork and the appreciator, art appreciation, the sense of, I think they use the word rasa, which means quality, but also the taste. And you cultivate your taste to be able to, you know, get to the point where you are a good listener. You're actively participating, not by creating it, but by appreciating it. And I always found that just to be a wonderful metaphor. It kind of reminds me also of the Confucian. There was an image of a person who was a great guitar player, and he had a friend that would listen to him, and the image of cutting the strings, because when his friend died, he cut the strings of the guitar and said, "There's no reason for me to play. There's no one who can listen anymore." You know, without the listener, there's no it. And I just always have loved that Indian sense of creating the work, but also the flip side of responding, of appreciating.
Thank you so much. He brought up the word rasa. I know it's getting a little dark here in this room. I only have natural light, so hopefully we can sort of go deeper and deeper into the twilight hours here. But rasa is a Sanskrit word, and it literally means juice or nectar. But as Sanskrit words, you know, mean so many different things, as Bob said, it also can mean taste, and it means like, it's sort of like the flavor of the art, right? Or the flavor of the music, something like that. So, and absolutely right. It's integral to the expression is the listening and the appreciation. And I can't remember who said it, but one person used the words deep listening in their beginning, their introduction. And that's amazing that somebody said that. I was just like, oh, you got me. Because I can't remember who did it, but deep listening is very, very important in Indian music. It's super, super important. And they use that word exactly in those order. And it brings me to the third thing that I wanted to talk about today when Renee told me about this topic. And there's a concept in Indian music called akhanda swar. So again, we get that without. So it means unbroken, and swara means note or sound. So it's the unbroken sound. And as the musician is playing, they can't like pick up their phone or do something else. Like, it's almost like a meditation where they have to completely become absorbed in the sound. And the way that one note leads to the next note, and then it leads to the next note until you conclude. And that's the whole idea of this music, the akhanda swar, the uninterrupted sound. And of course, there's tons of spiritual analogies here, that we can think about. But on a purely just performing evocative level, it means that the performer has to just really, what was the word I said when I was talking to Renee? Full presence. You have to lean into it 100%. You have to be fully present. And again, there's many relevancies here to life, right? We want to be fully present in life, whatever we're doing, if it's yoga, or being with, in a relationship, whatever it is, that full presence is required to get to that higher vibration. So thank you, Bob, for bringing that up. Anyone else want to jump in? You have a follow-up question, Bob?
As you were talking, I also remember that in Indian music, the ragas are sometimes morning ragas, or evening or spring, and the juice flows differently. And it takes a while for it to go. The 7-hour concerts are nothing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, you actually seem to know quite a bit about Indian music. They do. The melodies are associated with different seasons and times of day. Right now the light is getting dark here, so there would be a certain raga now, which would be the time of the lighting of the lamps. The light is very important in Indian music and painting too. Where that element of light, how much is there? How much absence of it is there? What time of night? Is it deep night? Is it almost morning? Is it the middle of the night? So there's a lot of cool stuff. And honestly, that's one of the things that drew me to Indian music, because I like all that stuff. I like the awareness of the natural world. And you find that in many other traditions. You find that in Hawaii, and all around the world, there's songs that have to do with seasons and, different phenomenon of nature. But I particularly like the way in India, it's codified to a really high degree. I find it really interesting.
I love the concept, Joss, that we could become completely absorbed as listeners.
Yeah.
And in our becoming completely absorbed to something to which that musician is also completely absorbed, we together, it seems like we kind of leave the realm of our personal self, where all those worries that you were talking about take place. And we enter into a more shared realm, a more universal realm. When Maurice talked about listening to Indian music and almost feeling as if you were in a trance-like state, I think it is perhaps that higher shared realm that we can enter in through music, that all of us have no doubt experienced in many different cultures and music. And there's a loss, and this actually is one of the descriptors, evidently, of flow state, of this sense of the ego self. And there just becomes a greater access to a larger sense of presence that I think maybe it was Mari didn't quite know what word to use. I'm not sure I know what word to use, but I get a sense of it. That's accessible, it seems like, as we become better and better listeners.
That was beautiful, Renee. And this is my playlist on my YouTube channel, which is actually my most successful album. It amazingly charted on the Billboard. I don't know how that happened. And it's called Meditation Music. So you guys can grab that, and it's a 45-minute album. You can stay in touch with me. My name is Jaffe, Jossjaffe. And I have lots of different kinds of music, from very, upbeat dancing music to very, very ambient, slow music. And it just dawned on me, probably one of the reasons I do that is because I'm an Indian musician, and we can play at any tempo or anything. And so, I'm not constrained by those genres, that all my music is fast or all my music is slow. I sort of do whatever I want to do. My record label's always wondering, they're like, why are you releasing a reggae album followed by an ambient album followed by an electronic album? I'm like, I don't know. It's just what I want to do. So speaking of which, we have some new songs coming out on Monday, There's a 44-minute piece built around the purring of a cat, which is an ancient sound healing modality, apparently. And we're writing an article in LA Yoga to describe that. And then on the 24th, there's a remix, which is kind of like a dancing remix to one of my songs. And then on the 1st of October, which is also my birthday, there's a song called Tarang, which is solo tabla. I'm really excited about that. So please connect with me. Okay, so now we're in total darkness and void. And I invite you to just close your eyes or take whatever posture you want. So this is what's called a mantra. And mantra is a literal encapsulation of raising the vibration. The word literally means instrument of thought or tool of the mind. And the idea behind mantra is that the mantra itself elevates our consciousness and protects us from the lower vibrations of, envy, fear, desire, things that can make us forget who we are and forget our universal love. So here's a mantra for you. Om Sat Chit Ananda Para Brahma Purushottama Param Atma Shri Bhagavati Sameta Shri Bhagavate Namah. Sat Chit Ananda Para Brahma Purushottama Param Atma Shri Bhagavati Sameta Shri Bhagavate Namah. Om Sat Chit Ananda.
Das, that was just amazing.
Thank you.
Mahalo nui.
Mahalo nui. Aloha.
Yes, and thank you all so much.